Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Cloud Architects podcast. Today, completely vibe coded, and you're looking at AR avatars of myself, Chris, and Micah. Actually, no, it's the real humans, and we can pass the avatar test. Well, actually, there is no more avatar test that can be passed, so let's just get over that and pretend that this is the real Chris Goosen who passes that scratch and sniff test. Hey, Chris.
Nick, so good to see you. I'm so glad to have you back and be back recording again. Super excited about our guest as well. I've known this guy for
Likewise.
ages and really had the pleasure to get to know him late last year, a couple of times at some conferences and stuff. And when you meet people and you just go, these are my people, right? And you kind of just like vibe, forgive the pun, with someone. I think that's sort of describes us. And so we've been sort of talking about making this happen for a while, and super happy to welcome Micah to the show. Micah, do you want to just give a quick intro, just tell the folks who you are and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. Chris, man, you touched my heart there. Appreciate that. Right back at you. And I can already tell the same of Nick. My name's Micah Heaton. I live in the Seattle metro area, just about 25, 30 minutes south of Seattle. Grateful for an opportunity to hang with you guys for sure. I am an MVP in the SIM and XDR stack on the Microsoft side, but more than that, a dad and a husband, a son, a brother, and a friend. So grateful for the opportunity to chat about some of the things that I do to try and keep up, gents, because I think that's
It's
the
big.
daily battle. Yep.
It's so
So
much.
I think, one of the things we want to talk about, and I guess the idea for today's sort of show is to talk about vibe coding, right? And I know Micah has amazed me with some of the things that he just builds, and I know Nick also sort of does a lot of AI assisted coding, and I think this is great to have you guys who are, I would say, are probably, you're into the scene, you're SMEs, if there is such a thing, when it comes to this whole sort of space at the moment. And so super excited. But I think maybe we need to get some definitions down before we jump into it. Nick, what do you reckon?
I reckon we should. And I think the first thing we should define is that an SME is someone who's got 45 minutes worth of experience more than somebody else in the same space, because it's brand new for all of us all at the same time. And what's nice is when we watch other clever people do clever things and we learn from them, because there is no such thing as one way of doing this. There are patterns and practices for sure. And what we do learn when we do this is that when we code with AI versus a vibe coding, and we're going to ask Micah to define that for us in a second. When we do that using architectural patterns and practices like we do in the real world, strangely enough, we get really good results. So Micah, why don't we start there? Do you want to help us define
please.
the difference between coding with AI and vibe coding?
Yeah, 100%. I'll ground it in a real world example. I'm not a programmer by trade, but I worked in web hosting and network operations center for years. And when you do that kind of work, you just end up in syntax all the time. So on some level, all of us technologists, if we're here for long enough, end up working with code. And as a result of that, probably have a preferred IDE. There's more acronyms, but just a place where you do your coding, right? In most of those places, whether it is GitHub now or whether it is Visual Studio, have an assistant for the better part of the past few years. So you might say, I want to use this particular language to accomplish this task, and you know how to get started, and it will make suggestions kind of along the way. Or it could even be as simple as using one of the more popular LLMs that have like a code editor that kind of as a sidecar that sits off to the side. And that is line by line still. You have essentially a file that you're working in, and then a folder structure that you build out an app in. Whereas vibe coding, which I told Chris this before, I really struggled with this term for a while, Nick. The vibe part, like I've gotten over this now, but the first time I saw that on a resume a few years ago, I was like, oh no, what are we doing? We can't. This is not a thing. But it
What are
is
we doing?
100% a thing. Yeah, it was like, I can't with this. It very much is the thing. The platforms that support vibe coding, which is, I want to build a thing. I'm going to talk in human language almost the entire time. 90% plus of the time, I'm just going to ask for what I want and describe it natural human language and watch this platform build it out as we go. And it might choose the front end and the back end and the database and the encryption standards and give recommendations and choices, but essentially handle all of the infrastructure in addition to the experience being mostly one-dimensional in the sense that you're not moving stuff around so much. You're just talking to the platform and the app sort of unfolds. Come to respect and appreciate and done a full 180 on that initial hesitation. Hopefully that's helpful.
It is, although I'd like to, at this point, just maybe put in, actually, it's not a maybe, for sure. Let's put in some kind of a parameter on this, where something that if you surf LinkedIn long enough, you'll hear these debates around things like cognitive offload versus cognitive surrender. And when we vibe code versus coding with AI, what we don't want to do is completely hand over control of every design decision, of every iteration, and then say, oh, this is something that I built, because you didn't. You've got no idea what's under the hood. And that's maybe an example of vibe coding. I did a thing, like Jeremy Clarkson likes to say. You did a thing, used AI to make a thing, and you have a rough idea of what it does because you use something like Whisper to talk to it via natural language, which is what all the cool kids on YouTube are doing today. And it looks very cool in the demo, right? But then when you've built something for production versus you kick the tires to try and prototype something, which is also fun and it has its place, production and coding with AI, and I'm going to keep on creating this delineation between the two.
I like it.
Coding with AI versus a vibe coding, and we joked earlier, just before we hit record, that if I was vibe coding, I would define vibe coding as, here's a one-shot prompt. One shot is when I ask or I hope that my LLM gets it correct in the first try without having to tell it, you broke it, go fix it, and try number 2 and says, oh, I forgot a JavaScript class, let me put that back in. That's why there's no results in the report. So your one shot is code me GTA 6, enter, and it does something, right? Let's just call that vibe coding, as opposed to coding with AI, where you have a clever human such as yourself who understands that there's a problem that they want to be able to solve. They know how to define the problem. That problem could be as broad as a user story. It could be a specification. It could be here's a repo that I really like, but I don't like the architectural choices, and these are the choices I would like to make. So let's refactor it. And then let me read the code, or actually, let's take a step back and say, if I'm coding with AI, why don't we start with planning? So Micah, where would you start when you code with AI?
I saw a funny meme on the Anthropic subreddit when, I don't know if you all saw this, but in the States, Fable, Anthropic's commercial side model of Mythos, which is like the Skynet.
Yeah.
And
the robots are coming.
Hey, we're foreign residents, right? So of course we were the ones who are targeted by this whole, like, you shall not have Fable 5.
Yes. But the meme was hilarious, though. It was like, don't worry, guys, I got us. And it was just a one prompt. It was a shot that was in, Opus 4.8 that was like, build me Fable. And that just cracked me up, because I think if you spend any amount of time with these things, you know that we've got a lot of rough edges. And I do appreciate that. Folks like ourselves, or folks that traverse those subreddits, they do have a good sense of humor about it. I love what you're asking, Nick, because for a little while there, the way that this started is I was actually MVP hopeful. And one of the things that I struggled with was constantly curating content and just staying up with the hustle and bustle of MVP type stuff. And I assume that a lot of your listeners or folks that you share this with are adjacent and understand what that MVP is, but essentially a designation from Microsoft that imbues an individual with credibility that they know what they're talking about. And I'm like, this is getting harder and harder to do this and demonstrate it. So I wanted to build with automation this kind of system, this content curation system. And in the process of working on that, Nick, I discovered Replits. This was about a year and a half ago, maybe a little bit more, just before Replit really exploded and took off. And so I basically just did what you said. I was like, make me a content system or make me this tool. And I was blown away. I was like, holy smokes, I've got all this backwards. Because before that, coding with AI, I When Security Copilot came out, one of the things that I do at work, one of my roles and responsibilities is to build tools for Microsoft prospects, folks who haven't necessarily adopted the product yet, but are interested in understanding its value. And so I wanted to create these experiences that helped step folks through what the value is. And I created this Security Copilot wizard, show me sort of step by step based on real data from my environment. The value is, did it line by line in Python with a plan in place. And so I scaffolded it all out I created a scaffold in GPT. It was like, this is my end goal. Help me develop some phases for this. What's the right way to start? And I've learned a lot along the way about user experience and the fallacy of the one shot thing in that, and to really break things out in phases over time. But it was pretty rough early. To answer your question a little bit more succinctly, it was a lot of napkin math. It's like, I want it to look like this. And I realized over time that 5 minutes of planning will save you 15 plus minutes of work. And that is true. If you kind of describe the outcome, the success criteria, it doesn't immediately at first have to be beautiful and pretty and that Guardians of the Galaxy color spread that a lot of the tools give us. And you can back into that, but just cracking the code on the mechanics has really become step number one. And I do tend to use Claude more often now to do some of that. We can get into some of the reasons why, but I've learned a bunch of lessons, spent a lot of money on tokens, trying to one-shot things that I know for certain there's more harmony in the end if we create some planning.
Yeah, I realized that I had generated code that I tried to refactor based on when I tried to one-shot the refactor versus I would actually, and my preferred IDE is still to this day is VS Code, just because I can change models in it rather easily. I haven't gone down the open code or the truly other religious experience, which has been bought by other people who are now listed and launching rockets. So
right,
yeah, although there are amazing editors out there, truly amazing editors, and frankly, the editor won't make or break you; it'll just accelerate you. But what I did. That was just as a side note. What I did notice is that when I would spend a fair amount planning and talking about how I wanted to refactor, so move into plan mode, validate my planning, actually read the plan that was generated, so don't do this, do that, and then very much like I would mark the homework of a human being and then execute against that, I would have disproportionately successful output, as opposed to refactor this from monolith into modules.
Yeah, 100%. I believe that.
You could do what I do, which is basically come up with an idea and then spend an eternity just planning it. And then never actually do it, but you just plan it, because I've been having the same. And then I've literally run through context windows now with my Claude instance, because I'm having this back. Now, to be fair, I like it because both of you guys live in completely different parts of the world to me. And sometimes when I have an idea and I want to talk to a smart person about it, you guys aren't online, right? And so it's nice to have. I got Claude, and I can just go, hey, look, here's what I'm planning to do, and it's just having that sort of back and forth with it, which I think is really helpful. I haven't generated any code yet. I'm still just, having the conversation about, well, okay, I think I've now settled on the architecture of how I want this thing to look and how I want it to work. But just a couple of nights ago, I went to bed and I couldn't sleep. I didn't fall asleep immediately. And I was having this massive back and forth about HTML5 frameworks with my Claude on my phone right now. I don't know that that's healthy either, right?
It's super healthy. Don't let your therapist talk you out of this.
But I did sort of come away with that going, okay, cool. Well, I've now decided yet another component of the thing that I'm working on, right? Which I think is kind of helpful. So I think that the back and forth and the planning stuff gets underestimated significantly by a lot of folks, right?
Yeah. Nick said something earlier that has me thinking now, that cognitive offloading versus cognitive surrender. As a parent, I'm always thinking about this in terms of, like, I want my children to just cognitive surrender sometimes, right? I'm like, I'm in charge. I know what the right thing is to do. So just listen to what I'm saying, right? Inevitably, these guys have, especially my 9-year-old at school, they have their own Chromebook. They interface with Gemini. They're learning how to prompt. And that, pressure testing and also the instruction from the teachers, like, things aren't always 100% right. Sometimes they hallucinate. And I feel that kind of being redirected back at me, Chris, as a parent, where my son is like, yes, but do you really know what you're saying? Give me, I'm like, oh, no, but um, the method to be more thoughtful in the way that you ask questions is really interesting to watch that come online in my own kids, and the parallel to see my son Aiden go through that same kind of planning you're describing when he wants to work on a thing. I'm just like, we're in a new world for sure
do
with
you
some of these things.
do you think that, because we've all been around for a little while, and we all do similar types of architecture focused jobs, right, where we have to think about the nuts and bolts and things that build things. Do you
Yeah.
think that folks like us have an easier time with this and understanding the difference between, let me
For
use
sure.
this tool to help me, versus
Yeah.
spit something in and then get what comes out of it, and it may or may not work, right? Because I think,
Yes.
because our brains have been taught to ask the questions of, like, how do we scale this thing? Will there be enough IO for those mailboxes to be able to, you know what I mean? Like, we've been conditioned to think in that way. And I wonder whether the younger generation, perhaps, or maybe folks who aren't as seasoned as us, maybe they don't think quite like that, right? So
Let me
we're
take this one first,
seasoned.
and
Yeah,
then
go ahead.
yeah,
I'll throw this one over to Chris. The tool is only as useful as the problem that you have to solve.
right.
And if you don't have a problem to solve, there's no use for the tool.
But I've been saying that about AI for ages, right? That it's a
For
solution
sure.
and a technology that most organizations don't have they haven't figured out what the problem is they're trying to solve yet.
You're exactly right. And the thing is, if we go back to, let's go back to when Jeffrey Snover joined Microsoft and became the father of PowerShell. Thank you for PowerShell. Thank you. So we were then looking at, well, we've got these shell-based languages and we're moving from piping text to piping objects. To this day, people have a hard time understanding how cool that is. But when we were teaching PowerShell, and I remember spending years at various different tech eds, this is how long this is, when we're still doing tech eds. And I would travel from tech ed to tech ed, and I would do these seminars. And I even had a session called Learning Advanced PowerShell. And we were going from PowerShell 1 to PowerShell 2, PowerShell 3. And I remember in the PowerShell 2 days, I had a session and I had a full room. And I said, let me just qualify the audience here really quickly and ask, how many of you are living in PowerShell every day? You live in the prompt, you know exactly what you're doing. 2 people put up their hand. I said, that's interesting. Let me qualify you all a little bit more. How many of you, and bear in mind the session title, Advanced PowerShell, how many of you are here because you're curious, you opened PowerShell, saw the blinking prompt, typed in something, got a weird error, didn't know what to do and closed it, and the rest of the room put up their hand? So then I developed how to learn PowerShell from inside PowerShell in 15 minutes. And I used to do this as a party trick. It's like, I will teach you 4 commands inside PowerShell, get help, get method, the usual stuff, and teach people how to learn PowerShell inside PowerShell once you understood the verb, noun, syntax, etc. So then the next challenge was, for the next week, you may not open a GUI and you will learn PowerShell. And they did. And engineers had amazing success. So then AI came along and we said, here's this great thing as a prompt. Sounds familiar, right? And then we said, it's going to solve all your problems. Like what? Well, and then we didn't have an answer. As an industry, we didn't have an answer. It's like, and then we caused this massive FOMO. This is, if you aren't prompting your AI, you are failing as a human being, and you will stop being attractive to the sex that you want to be attractive to. People will spontaneously reject you in the streets. And the FOMO was real. And then we had a few responsible individuals that said, if you have a very well-defined process and you try not to use AI instead of RPA, and you use AI to accelerate what that process requires from a definition or problem solving, etc. So what you would use an LLM for, you will get disproportionate results. And we did. But again, that was the exception. Then we started using, for engineering, the concept of an LLM as a code accelerator. Marvelous success. Where we are now, if you look at what Copilot is now versus the promise of Copilot, it's remarkable. Microsoft Copilot today is remarkable. And what it can do today is generate significant disproportionate value. But there's a journey that goes with that. So you
For
actually
sure.
have to take a user and ask them, so tell me what you do all day, every day. And then you can take these blocks of cognitive offload and define them either as prompts or, if we're getting a little bit more advanced, as reusable skills that we can then run several times a day. So summarizing things based on particular criteria. It shouldn't just be this giant prompt that we save in a library. It should be a skill that we teach to our assistant. It doesn't matter if this is an AI assistant that I use inside Office or an AI assistant that I use inside my coding environment of choice. And where we are as an industry is that we have insane capability, massive FOMO, and I honestly think that probably somewhere between 1% and 3% of people who could get benefit from this are getting benefit, and the rest of everyone else is going, I wonder when this benefit is going to arrive for me. But that's my very long-winded opinion. What do you think, Micah?
I think that's true. When you were describing that initial FOMO, it just made me think that most of the way folks were spending their clever time was to generate memes or images or, turn themselves into the vinyl pop or the bobblehead or whatever it was. And then we're hurting the polar bears because of how much we're doing that. And we kind of got lost. Like, what is the objective? We're using it just to use it for using sake. I do actually think it's true because I do have people ask, like, I just feel like there's no way I can catch up now. I'm too far behind. I think it's true that it is actually a very small percentage of folks that are kind of building into their own use case methodology. Something I stand by still to this day is that folks who have worked help desk a long time know where the way something is supposed to work breaks down in the way that it actually works. So you work help desk, you do support troubleshooting and tickets, you see the technology break just as often or more than when it works, is people don't come into the help desk because something's working the way that it's supposed to. So we kind of, you live in help desk, you're already kind of living on that edge. And to this day, stand by that. I think one of the most valuable questions you can ask for help desk type interviews or support desk is, like, what's your experience with action adventure games where you have to troubleshoot a situation, there's not a clear path forward? And I'm talking like old Commodore 64 type games that had sort of their own command line interface, Nick, where you ask walk over here, open this desk.
Yes.
Is there a key in the drawer? Old King's Quest, Sierra, Lucasfilms, Monkey Island type games that I grew up on. People are like, how do you do what you do? And I'm like, I actually, to be honest, I'm overwhelmed by the specialization and capabilities of most MVPs because I'm like, gosh, they're so flippin' smart. And my superpower is that I will try harebrained stuff to try and figure out how to get it to stick because that Microsoft Learn documentation is out of date. It's not actually right. So to answer your question, Chris, and then you as well, Nick, I do think technologists like us who probably have a lot of troubleshooting experience, we spent a lot of our actual professional calling was helping other people do their job, whether it was with the software they were using or the hardware they were using. It just wasn't working. You just had to figure it out. And so my concern, going back again to like all the humans in this loop, is that cognitive offload right now is so strong. If you don't have that kind of foundational troubleshooting knack, like you might miss the opportunity along the way to make it more personal or build something that's more meaningful.
I see it in our own help desk where an engineer uses ChatGPT or similar to troubleshoot something, sends it back to the customer, and you can actually see the facepalm response going, this thing's been running for 5 years. I don't think what you suggested is actually the solution.
I've been on the receiving end of those. There's nothing quite as insulting as when someone sends you a screenshot from ChatGPT where they've literally just asked for a fix to the problem that you've spent the last 6 hours trying to solve, right? And you're just like, you think that much of me that's what you're going to do. And you haven't even tried to hide the fact that it's a ChatGPT or a whatever. You've just screenshotted it and sent it to me. Like I couldn't do that myself, right? It's the old, let me Google that for you.
I was just going to say.
For 2026, right? So very, very, well, what you're going to do? It's the world we live in now, right?
It's a different kind of when I used to out of desperation, log something with Microsoft support, and they would send me back my own article as a suggested fix. And I thought, no, the reason why I'm coming to you is that because what I wrote a month ago is not working.
That is amazing. I had an interesting experience. It just makes you realize, like, how do these LLMs get the knowledge that they get? Related to what you're saying, Nick, I was working on a webinar, a presentation about all the new stuff that the Microsoft Sentinel team has built. The first 6 years, it was pretty stably just SIM and SOAR, right? This past year, it's become all of these other things. So I was like, I got to help this webinar. The intention is to get folks from, that first 6 years of knowledge to like what's gone on in the past 10 months. And as I was asking questions about how the MCP tools work now and Sentinel Data Lake, one of my colleagues that I work with and a fellow MVP, his name's Jaime Guimera Cole, showed up in the Claude answer like, hey, by the way, this guy built this custom MCP thing. And I was just like, that really grounded me and brought me back to reality that like it is the sum total of our collective experience.
Mm-hmm.
At the very least, the first modular trainings of these LLMs that have brought us to where we are. And it's helpful to remember that. The human on both sides of that equation you were describing, Chris.
So you'd mentioned Replit before, and I know you're always building some cool stuff.
Yeah.
Is there a methodology to kind of how you jump into things, or is there a particular way that you approach these types of projects when you have an idea? Or
100%.
how do you go about that?
Yeah, I love this transition. Nick called it out earlier. The trick for me now is all MD files. And just to explain an MD file, it's a markdown file, which is essentially your way of pulling a set of instructions or behavioral parameters that you expect into one file. When we started in ChatGPT and whatnot, we maybe copy and paste a lot, like this is what I wanted, or it would allow you to put in custom instructions. For programmers, MD files are really helpful because you might appreciate one library with an exception to this part of the library, and you don't want to constantly retell the thing. Vibe coding can be very expensive if you do not build a system to engage the platform, and Replit is no different. And for folks who aren't tracking, Replit's been around for like 10 years, but their identity for the first 7 years or so is to help folks just kind of manage the nuances of infrastructure deployment in a repeatable way. And about 3 years ago, they made this pivot to realize like, oh, people who use AI that are technologists, they have this issue, but they have other issues as well. It's like one of the things I, shared with my colleagues, like, I don't ever want to build decks anymore, ever again. I don't want to manage infrastructure ever again. I know that's a lofty goal, but the real power of the vibe coding platforms is not just in that they can be very expensive and take your money. That is one of their superpowers for sure. It is that they can manage that infrastructure side of it, Chris, but I try to manage that on the front end. And when Nick was talking about those MD files, for me now, it is to use Claude as a starting point instead of the vibe coding platform, because if you do a lot of your ideation, just the concept art you were talking about when you stayed up late talking to GPT about your continuous iteration of feature and design, it's going to be very expensive. So like one prompt in Claude, depending on your plan, is pennies, but one prompt in Replit could be $2 to $10, depending on what you asked it and what power settings you gave it, and then it decides for itself the way an agent would. Like, okay, I get it. I'll go do the thing now, and you may not, necessarily get back a result. So I will, if you don't mind, I'll share something that I'm working on.
Yes, please.
Now, yeah, I have built an experience, Nick, for, I think Chris knows this, for the Microsoft Innovation Hubs globally. It is essentially like a red versus blue teaming experience. And when I started building that, it was just in Replit and it was very expensive. And I was like, I want you to build a red versus blue experience that can sit in a theater room of, 100 people on a 50-foot screen and needs to be dynamic and amazing and don't make any mistakes, right? And it was a really awful way to start. But over time, I was able to kind of correct and iterate and build something that was actually useful. But one of the things that you want, what I do, Chris, I don't just use Replit or just use Claude. I will use HeyGen to create avatars and to build videos. I'll use 11 Labs to create sound effects or to create like the vocal track to the avatar in HeyGen, or I'll use Sumo to do music. So everybody probably that's listening, or even you guys at different points, will use any one of those things. I try to bring it all together in Replit. Okay, so this is an experience that I built with my son, and the intention was to start helping him see how to kind of use these things and build, because I know that he will outpace me. So this red versus blue experience is called Aiden.io. That's my son's name, and Aiden stands for Aid Distribution for Youth Network. And you can see that there's a nice interface here. It ultimately pops out to all of the stage space in the innovation hubs. Nick, you've been in there probably. You've got a 50-foot screen, and so it'll load like a host control and a red screen and a blue screen all on the theater screen. But I didn't have the ability you talked earlier about kind of recording on a video, Chris. I didn't necessarily have the ability to re-record a lot of video and take a bunch of takes. So I took a video that I had recorded professionally with Microsoft at one point for a commercial that we were doing, and I loaded that video into HeyGen. Did that pop up full screen?
Mm-hmm.
You able to
Yep.
see that?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
this is me being the bad actor, but I'm explaining the risk and threat that I'm going to present to the organization we're going to attack, and it's the blue team's job to try and protect us. But I don't feel good about attacking a charity organization, so I'm leaking the attacks one at a time before they come out. Well, this was maddening, Chris, to try and build this from just the prompt interface on Replit without actually having a system letting it know in advance, I need containers for videos that I'm going to build outside of you and bring into you. And so what should have been a multi-phase project where, I have a starting point and then phase 2 and phase 3 and phase 4 and phase 5 on and kind of scaffolding it out the way that you said that you do. I just did this one prompt at a time until I finished it, man. And it was very expensive effort. And so the next project that I am working on right now for the Innovation Hub is like a game show type experience, but I'm iterating all of this on Claude to begin with. And one phase that I complete, I build the MD for it, and then I bring it over and drop it in. So you're the first to actually see this. I haven't even showed, any of the Innovation Hubs this. But it is Who Wants to Be a CISO, which is like a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire type game show experience. But it's based on, the process of answering Microsoft security type questions. And because I know the failings of doing this before in a number of other projects, I know that the right way before I pick the art direction and before I pick the code base, I describe what the success criteria is, what my environment will be. And I do that in Claude. And then I ask Claude to give me the MD file. And I will refine that MD file probably 1, 2, 3 times. And now I'm having, I've accelerated this project by next at least, guys, making sure that I do those planning steps first. I am obsessive about the end result. So even though that Aiden.io red versus blue, it took a lot longer, I did obsess over it. It didn't end up being a bad outcome, but gosh, man, was that a sloppy way. So for folks, who are interested in vibe coding, just know that it could be very expensive, but Replit is an amazingly powerful tool at building you outcomes if you plan somewhere else first and then bring those instructions back. And that would be my guidance to the group.
Yeah,
I think that's awesome. That's awesome guidance. It's a really good way to sort of summarize it all, and it's really nice for you to showcase some of the things that you've been able to sort of put together, which I really like to see. I want to be conscious, I guess, of time as well here. And so I think before we let you go, Micah,
although it's very sad.
I
Very sad.
I'm so sorry.
I wish we had another hour.
We just got to the good part. I'm so sorry about that.
I know. But it always lends itself to a part 2, right, at some point. But before we let you go, one of the things we like to always ask is there something you want to plug, or how can you, how do you want to be found? Do you like folks to find you on LinkedIn, or obviously, we know you attend conferences from time to time, but anything you want to plug or any way you want to be found?
Please, I love to be a friend and make friends. Try to be a student as much as a teacher as well. So really appreciate, folks want to connect on LinkedIn. I'm not necessarily your influencer type, but I am absolutely interested in answering questions that folks have and also following along on your journeys as well.
That's
Yeah, very
amazing.
nice. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and show us some of the stuff you've been working on. And I love to see, and I love to sort of hear the different sides of the different experiences that you guys have had doing this type of stuff, right? Because I think, Nick's obviously, he's done some AI assisted coding and built some pretty cool tools as
I
well.
can tell.
And it's really nice to kind of hear how you guys approach these things, because like I said it before, I think we are all conditioned to think in a particular way, but even still, we tend to approach these things differently, right? To kind of get to the outcomes that we want, which I think is really awesome. And hopefully that helps folks at home who are planning projects or looking to build projects. Hopefully that helps them save some credits, right? Because these credits are
Yeah.
expensive, as you said. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I'd like to just to frame this, or to put a bookend on this, saying that there is no one way to solve a problem and there's no one way to think. There are patterns and practices that can save you an astounding amount of tokens and money. And what you tend finds to work really, really well is that you find a cognitive path that is similar to yours. So if you think like Micah and you code like Micah, you will have success. So finding someone who thinks like you and learning from their coding practices can save you an enormous amount of time. Although I would challenge you to understand what is it that they do and make sure that they understand what they do so that you can be part of that success and replicate that thinking pattern for yourself from an understanding point of view as opposed to blind copy.
Yeah.
and thank you for that disclaimer.
Yeah, guys, I just want to say thank you so much. I know that we kind of we chat about this before and left on the good stuff, but I'd love to see what you have going on, Nick, to be honest, because if I'm being completely honest about what Nick just said, there are so many times where I've made mistakes and been so incredibly inefficient, but I'm just stubborn and hard-headed. And so I'll push through a thing with brute force the wrong way, and then after the fact debrief and be like, man, that could have that could have been so could have had a different experience and a different outcome. So
That's the
if
definition of learning, Micah.
yes, it is. Yes, it is. That's true. I appreciate that. I got to have a little self-compassion. But if we are privileged enough to come back to each other and we have a chance to kind of get into the actual nuts and bolts, open the tools up, talk through good and bad, I'm here for it. Appreciate you guys.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much for taking the time. And Nick, as always, I love hanging out with you, man. Thank you for
Same,
making
buddy.
this happen for us. And we will get this pushed up and hope to see everyone on the next episode.